Now, we move on to the second keynote address of Communique'14. For the same, I would like to request our guest of honor, Mr. 2Tarun Sharma, Global Head, CSSC, Nokia Networks, to please come up on stage. Sir is a people leader with 2 decades of eclectic international experience in telecoms, spanning sales and marketing, sales support, KPO, BD, consulting, training and engineering. Currently, he is the head of global services, centralized sales support center at Nokia Networks, where he is responsible for leading a large cross-functional and cross-continental team of solution engineers, solution specialists, and solution managers, supporting Nokia's global frontline sales with bidding, tendering, RFI, RFP response, and proactive sales. We welcome you, sir, to SITM. May I request, sir, to kindly preside over the session.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I think it's still morning, yes. Am I audible at the back? Yes, sir. Great. So first off, really want to thank you for all the hospitality. It has been a wonderful morning for me. I thank, in particular, the faculty and the students of SITM, Professor Patil, Professor Aslekar, Dr. Iyer, my esteemed industry peers. It was wonderful, and I'm sure you'll agree, to listen to Bala and his insights on the industry. I consider myself a fairly well-traveled person, but the irony is that I've never been to Pune. And so that gives me a bit more happiness that I've come here. And also I must add that I'm very impressed by the way the whole event is run. The slick presentations, the way everything is running like a smooth machine. So congratulations to the organizing committee for that. Now, this is not supposed to be an advertisement for Red Bull, but let me let out a secret to you. When I come back here, I recall my own B-school days and the days in which I practically survived on Red Bull. And I'm sure many of you will understand, appreciate that. If someone would have taken my blood out in those days, they would have found Red Bull. You were spending so many nights waking up. But okay, so let's get to what I want to discuss over here. I want to put very simple 3 perspectives. Yeah, please take a moment to settle down. They are perspectives from my company. I work for Nokia, and by the way, I cannot fix your phone. I come from the company, legacy company, that used to be known as Nokia Siemens Networks. It turned to Nokia Solutions and Networks, and now, for simplicity's sake, it's Nokia. Nokia is also not a Japanese company. I think you know that it's a Finnish company. We have some friendly neighbors over here from Sweden. So I suppose being telecom majors, you know that there are 2 big Nordic vendors out there, Nokia and Ericsson. Then you have Alcatel-Lucent, which is a Franco-American entity, and then you have a couple of Chinese vendors like ZTE and Huawei, and of course there are a lot of other players in the industry. So what do I want to speak about? I want to keep my message simple without sounding too simplistic. There are 3 things. So first, I would like to socialize Nokia's technology vision 2020. A lot of which, some of it rather, was alluded to by Professor Patil. Some of it came up in Bala's presentation. And I'm sure I haven't gone through your reports. I'll find a lot of commonality in there. I'm very confident. So many of the ideas presented over here, you might have seen before. But as a company, we are very confident that this is the direction that the industry is taking. And we take great pride in the fact that we are one of the companies, we are one of the players that are making things happen. And when I look back at my own career, there's a sense of pride that I also have, and I'm sure you'll have when you progress 10, 20 years into the future. I grew up in the era of BC, before cell phones. Like Bala also mentioned that, right? And now we are in AD, right? AD? After, so you know the trade secrets. We are completely dependent. By the way, I want to ask a question over here. How many of you use smartphones? Show of hands. Can I rest my case and walk off? That is the beauty of this industry. The way it has grown by leaps and bounds. If I rewind myself, as I was talking in the early 90s when I started my career, the cell phone industry did not exist. Telecommunications, as we see it now, did not exist at all. It was a completely different world. And of course, we are not even talking of things like YouTube and Facebook and all the other applications that came much later. And some of these are like less than 10 years old. Twitter, for example. So the industry over the last 20 years has remarkably transformed, and Bala spoke so eloquently about some of those things that are happening. So I'm not going to harp upon those things, but I think we should consider, we as a community, as a telecom community, should consider ourselves very, very fortunate that we are part of this revolution. Cisco CEO John Qualcomm's CEO famously said, wireless communication is the biggest technology platform that humanity has. You know what? More people in the world have access to a cell phone than a toothbrush. This fact speaks to itself, and when I read this, it hit me in such a big way. Anyway, so 3 things. Nokia Technology Vision 2020. Some of it, snippets of it you've seen in the earlier presentations. Some of it probably might be new. And when I talk about Nokia's vision, it is primarily very, very network-centric, because that's what we do. It is very, very mobile broadband-centric, because we are foreseeing the explosion of data. Now, with a show of hands, sorry, the point I wanted to prove was all of us have smartphones. But think about this fact. There are about 7 billion people on the planet. 5 billion of those do not have any access to the internet, to the world of information that is out there. Something that we take for granted. We do virtually everything on the internet now. It is unimaginable. Sometimes when I think back, how did I really look for directions before the age of the internet? And you just cannot make sense out of it. How did that happen earlier? Because it becomes so ingrained as part of our habits. So, Technology Vision 2020, which will be, as I said, a little bit of more of a network story, mobile broadband story. So 5 billion people do not have internet access still, and 1 billion of those happen to be in India. This reminds me of a story. I'm sure many of you must have heard of this shoe company that sent two salesmen to a very remote remote part of the world which was untouched by civilization, and asked them to report back. What do you see? You've heard that story, right? Have you? So one salesman calls back and says, let's say calls back, however he calls, says, there is no potential. Sorry, this is a shoe company. So it says, everyone is barefoot over here. No potential for shoe exists. No one wears shoes. The other salesman says, this has great potential because no one wears shoes. They're looking at the same data. It's like the glass half full, half empty. They're looking at the same data, but arriving at diametrically opposite conclusions. So we are kind of in the same situation over here. Although all of us in this room have smartphones, it comes so naturally to us. But there is a world of humanity out there that doesn't have that. And that is the next challenge that all of us have to do, to bring the power of communication, so to bring the power of the internet, to bring the power of mobile data to this massive humanity. The second thing, which will tag on to my first theme, is trends shaping the market. Again, I think you must be the experts in this area. You're observing these trends from a very, very, I would say, neutral position. And the third is the way I see, since most of you are either going to graduate this year or next year, you would be interested in knowing what are the growth prospects, what are the opportunities, and how can I capitalize on these things. So I'll briefly touch upon those as well. So there are actually 6 components of our Technology Vision 2020. What are those? Support 1,000 times the capacity that we have right now. And just imagine for a moment 1,000 times adding capacity. It is a Herculean task. It is a gargantuan task. How do we do that? We're going to talk about that a little bit in a moment. But it's a challenge. But challenges are nothing but disguised opportunities, which means that for all of us in the industry, it is probably the biggest opportunity of our lifetime. Once, 20 years ago, there was this revolution when GSM came around. That was the first time most of the countries in the world got a taste of mobile telephony. And now I think this is the second big revolution happening where everyone is moving to data. So we have to add 1,000 times capacity to the network. Second, which goes along with this, is to reduce latency into milliseconds. And when we're talking milliseconds, we're talking low milliseconds. It's like lightning fast. And there are a lot of enablers that need to be there before that happens. What is the third requirement? Is a personalized network experience. All of us now sort of virtually spend quite a bit of our life on the cloud. You must have heard this term. What is there on the cloud? A lot of our personalized information. When we access something from the cloud, very likely it would be very personal to you. So this kind of experience is going to grow manifold. So these 3 are sort of, in a way, more from a user standpoint. Now, if I look at it from a network provider standpoint or a vendor standpoint, it looks like this. There is a huge amount of OpEx pressure on operators. And especially in countries like India, in BRIC countries, in developing countries, energy expenditures are a significant drain on the operator's OpEx. In some countries, it goes as high as 30, 40%, in some cases even 50%, because you are running sites in completely off-grid locations. There's no commercial power. You're running it on expensive diesel generators and so on. So it's a huge drain. So when we're talking of adding 1,000 times capacity, we cannot afford, the world cannot afford to spend 1,000 times the energy that we are spending right now. And by the way, telecom sector is one of the biggest consumers of electricity in the world. So we have to somehow flatten the energy, total energy consumption. How do we do that? We're going to talk about that in a moment. There are several ways. What else? Reinvent telcos for the cloud. And this is, again, also a very, very big thing that is now on the verge of hitting the industry, the cloudification of the telco environment, virtualization. We're already seeing that happening. It'll only accelerate in the future. And finally, a very important transformation that is happening in the network side of the business is creating these networks that are self-aware, self-healing, self-optimizing. And again, this also kind of adds to that whole OpEx story, because once you're expanding the footprint of the network to such a dramatic degree, when you are adding capacity 1,000 times, when you want latency in milliseconds, you're making a lot of investments, right? And on the OpEx side, you cannot afford to have a network which requires a lot of manual intervention to fix things, to optimize, and so on. So this is also a major trend in the industry to create these self-aware networks. So here's if you don't remember anything from this talk, remember this. 1 gigabyte per user per day by 2020. This is the kind of explosion. I mean, I think even the word explosion doesn't do justice to what we are about. It's like a deluge. It's like a tsunami, if I can use that word. It's a tsunami of data that we are talking about. 1 gigabyte. And you know, some of that I can see it happening in my own life. Well, not on the mobile side so far right now, but my home connection, I have a 30 GB connection. And in about 20 days, it is getting exhausted. So that thing is going to move over to the mobile world as well. And of course, this will first happen in the more mature economies where we have LTE and LTE Advanced and some of the newer innovations coming in, but it has to happen everywhere, right? And that is the nature of telecommunications technology. It is a great leveler. Remember, most of you will not remember, but in the 90s, it was such a great leveler that India leapfrogged directly from having no wireless network to an international standard 2G network. So technology does not respect boundaries. It moves across. So anything that will happen is going to very quickly come over here as well. So 1 gigabyte per user per day. Remember that. And again, this sort of shows the evolution of how we have moved from relatively simple devices to more complexity and a whole universe of applications that we are seeing now. There are layer upon layer upon layer that are sitting on top. And I'm reminiscing some of my old days. I used to be, at one point of time, in my early career, I used to be a training instructor for Nokia. I used to deliver trainings to Nokia's customers and as well as employees. And this was a time when the transition from GSM to GPRS was taking place. I don't know if you remember GPRS again. Looks like very old. But that was the first step when the wireless world was moving from a voice to data. So it was a remarkable shift in the sense. It was not felt that way in that day and age. But again, hindsight is 2020. When I look back, I say, yes, that was a moment in history where the shift from voice to data happened. And of course, it was very slow, and it had its own latency problems. But I remember that since I was training these upcoming technologies, I had access to some of the R&D data and information, and I used to tell my customers that, there will be a day which is not too far off in the future when we will stop using our phone like this and we'll use it like this. And I still remember the comical expression I used to see in people's faces. Is he crazy? What is he talking about? Why should we use a phone like this? And this is way before all of these smartphones and feature phones and all of this is, again, this is the age of the black and white phones, monochrome displays, and so on. So, we sometimes, there's a very famous saying, it's difficult to make a prediction, especially about the future. So we all try to make predictions, and some of this might be a little way off, but we know the direction. So the idea is that maybe it doesn't happen in 2020, but maybe it happens in 2021, 22. Who cares? But we know that this is the industry, this is the way in which the industry is evolving, this is where we are going. This is where the future lies. From a user standpoint, these are the expectations. High-speed broadband, broadband everywhere, and capacity for all. And I think you probably appreciate it as the younger generation like no one else. That I want it everywhere, I want full speed, I want low latency, and all of that stuff. But of course, there are a number of challenges that we have to surmount. There is many a slip between the cup and the lip. But we know that we have charted out the roadmap, and we know where, as I said, where we are going. 1,000 times more capacity. There are 5 times more smartphones by 2017 alone, and 3 times more apps. So again, I don't want to bore you, burden you with number and stats. I think probably the message is driven home in the sense of where we are going. So the future could arrive before we are ready for it, and that's why it's very important for us to be ready. Because once it hits, it's already too late. So 1,000 times more capacity. How do we support 1,000 times more capacity? It's not a small deal we're talking about. We have again, just to put the context right, this has never been done before, adding 1,000 times capacity. So there are no models to look for. We don't know. But their technology provides solutions as well. So we know some of the things that we can do. Of course, we know that we have to extract more efficiency out of the spectrum, which is always a huge challenge. We are spectrally limited. There are regulatory issues all over the world, but the newer technologies are so much more spectrally efficient than the previous generation. And that is one of the other compelling reasons to move to these newer generation technologies, because they are so much more spectrally efficient. And spectrum is a huge asset. How much do operators pay for acquiring spectrum? Some of the operators, all they do, with all due respect, they are my customers, but their primary job is acquiring spectrum, dealing with regulators, and marketing and selling, which is a fair business model, very, very. So this is a huge part. How do we make it spectrally efficient? The other change that we're going to see, and again, we've started already, we've seen this happening in more developed markets, is the proliferation of small cells, or as the industry term goes, the het nets. So we'll have a mix of multiple network topologies, layers, and so on. Because we know that our existing macro cell layer, the big base station sites that you see, the towers, they cannot deliver 1,000 times capacity. We have to have a mix of a number of different elements in there. We have to have integration with Wi-Fi, picocells, femtocells, and so on. So a number of these things will open up. Latency. I would say the biggest irritant when you're trying to download something, right? You just keep on waiting, and what's that? That's nothing but latency. So again, the network architectures of the future provide solutions to issue of latency. You can address it through bandwidth. Of course, the easiest way is to allocate more bandwidth. If you have more bandwidth, you have a bigger pipe. And if you have a bigger pipe, you can support more subscribers, and it'll be faster. You can work on the control side. How do you control the content? You can reduce the physical distance, for example. You can use proximity principles. So one of the solutions that is gaining quite a bit steam is, at least in Nokia, we call it liquid apps. And what it does is it actually moves quite a lot of frequently used content right to the edge of the network, which means that it's sitting right at the base station. So it can reduce a lot of that latency to go to the network and come back. And unfortunately, I don't have a slide over here on that, but there are a lot of tests that show dramatic reduction in latency for that. So a lot of such innovative solutions will rule the roost to fix the issue of latency. Now, personalized network experience. This is nothing but differentiation. Everyone is a unique subscriber. I want my content my way. You want your content your way, right? You have your own set of requirements, priorities, your frequently visited sites, and so on. So you want that differentiation. And that is the one that will determine whether you get a personalized user experience or not. And a lot of these technology enablers will ensure that subscribers get this differentiation. So you differentiate customers. You can differentiate on a number of criteria. You can use solutions like customer experience management, SEM solutions, that provide a lot of insight to operators and can deliver targeted, differentiated services to subscribers. You can differentiate the offering, of course, and you can also differentiate the traffic and prioritize and quality of service and all that stuff. Self-aware that we talk about. So, as I said, a significant amount of the operator expenditure is on network OpEx. So reducing the OpEx is the biggest thing on an operator's mind. That is one of the reasons that has spurred a lot of the business around managed services. So we end up, so vendors like Nokia and Ericsson and Huawei and other partners in crime end up delivering managed services. So we run the network for the operators. There's a very strong likelihood, by the way, and I have to check my facts, but there's a very strong likelihood that the network that you use over here has been provided and run by Nokia and possibly Ericsson as well. So what will self-aware networks do? Self-aware networks will take action automatically when they see a certain situation. So there's a concept called predictive operations also that is gaining ground. What is predictive operations? So a certain number of hours before a certain network degradation is expected, the system is going to sound you. Will tell you that, and typically this happens about 48 hours, so the operator has enough time to take corrective action. So let's say, and this is again, this is based on big data. So there's a lot of information that the network collects, and I think it was Bala who said that the network knows everything about you, right? So, and that's exactly right. Your network operator knows more about you probably than your girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse. And I'm not exaggerating. There is, and again, just to quote Bala, there's a lot of good things you can do out of it. Of course, it's not good if it goes in, it's not used properly. But if you use the proper provisions, it can be used in many, many exciting ways, interesting ways. And one of them, of course, is using big data for predictive operations. So networks optimize themselves. So first of all, when you're installing networks, they integrate themselves. So they have this sort of a consciousness built into them that they can recognize, understand when they are connected to the rest of the ecosystem and can configure themselves. And then when a problem arises, they can take corrective actions as well. So there is minimal human intervention required, and that, of course, translates directly into lower OpEx. So I think I've already spoken about this. So the industry term is called SON, self-optimizing or self-organizing networks. I'm sure you must have heard that. Telco for the cloud. Why is this so important? And this is not just a buzzword. So, initially when some things you see on the radar in terms of technology innovations, we generally tend to believe that these are kind of pie in the sky buzzwords, some things that will that are probably out of Star Trek kind of world. Telco cloud used to be that thing until a few years ago, but now we can see that it has become so real, and the reason, purely very, very strong business economic reasons. Operators see that there is unpredictable data growth in the sense that, okay, it's growing, but you don't know where. And so when you are virtualizing your network, you can scale very, very easily. It is such a cost-efficient way to scale. So you get economies of scale, you get benefits of low total cost of ownership. There is better end-user experience because there is a lot of flexibility in the whole system. And if you look at the fourth box on the right, the innovation cycle is so much faster. And the graph shows the telco approach and the cloud approach. And this cloudification brings together the IT and telecom worlds like never before. So I think in a couple of years down the line, it'll be hard to tell where telco starts and where telco ends and where IT starts. It'll be so enmeshed together. And finally, on energy consumption, if you look at this slide, this was a study done by Nokia. Only 15% of the energy that is consumed by the telecom operators actually goes into transmitting bits, which is what the end desired outcome is, right? You want to transmit bits. So there are so much of overheads, there is so much of wastage. I shouldn't call it wastages, but there are so many things. You have cooling, heating, lighting, there are losses, there are power supplies and fans. And if you've seen any of these data centers, they're like huge hogs of energy. So clearly, something needs to be done. This is, again, it's an unsustainable way to grow. Right? Since we're talking of 1,000 times growth, we're talking of 1 GB per user per day, we can't just go along like this. So what do? Again, technology to the rescue. How do we do that? Of course, the newer generation of telecommunication equipment is much more energy efficient than the previous generation, which is great. Not just spectrally efficient, if I talk about the radio only, not just spectrally efficient, but also very, very energy efficient. Then using a multi-radio configuration saves a lot of power. Instead of having a separate rack for a 2G and a 3G, and if in the future if you have 4G and all, instead have a multi-radio. The same rack does everything. So it's so much more energy efficient. And again, like I said earlier, move to het nets. When you have a form factor of a small size base station, it's going to consume far less energy. Some of these newer base stations are just like your Wi-Fi routers. You put them, you don't even see them. These newer generations, they're so small. So the energy consumption and requirements and the complications of all of that goes into the passive infrastructure, goes away by itself. And of course, you can do a lot of stuff using network management principles. You can, for example, there are smart energy-saving mechanisms in the software that reduces the power of the radios or base stations during off-peak hours, in the early morning, late night hours, or it can cut down power to a certain number of radios. All of that is configurable so that you're using only enough energy that is required. And of course, modernization is certainly what we're talking about is modernization, because clearly the legacy equipment, you cannot do all of this on the legacy equipment. And a trend that is personally very close to my heart, and I handled that business for a couple of years, energy solutions, renewables. I think the time has come. It has to happen. So using or powering more and more networks through renewables, whether it's solar or wind or fuel cells. I personally think fuel cells are very, very promising as a technology. But of course, it'll go through its own business cycle. So that was on the vision part, and I hope it resonates with most of you. The second thing is about trends, and these also should be very familiar, I suppose, to you. So there are 10 trends that we see that are shaping the industry, that are shaping the market. Industry consolidation is happening. As I said, it's hard to say whether you're a telco company or whether you're an IT company. The boundaries are blurring, already blurring. So the consolidation has started happening. It will accelerate in the future, because the architecture of the future will be much more complex, and a single company, a very verticalized company, cannot probably handle that. Second is entry of new players. Again, this is probably applicable to most technology industries. There will always be the upstart companies, and I must confess, when I was watching Bala's slides, there was several companies that I had no idea about. I saw them, some of their logos, I saw them for the first time, and the industry is so big, and there are so many corners, if I can put it that way, of the industry. There are so many niche corners where there are new players can come in, where the barrier to entry is not that great. Mobile data traffic growth, we already talked about it. I think it's probably a given at this point of time. Mixed radio technology environment, also I talked about that this is how the future of networks will evolve. It'll be a mixed technology until the time the oldest generation becomes obsolete. Operator revenues are declining, although despite the fact that the data usage is growing, but there is a lot of pressure on operator revenues. So there's also a trend that we see. Network sharing and consolidation. This is also a very big theme that's happening. Of course, we cannot just continue building greenfield networks. There are very few greenfield networks that are coming up in the world, rarely. So what's going to happen is the growth will come from sharing. A lot of the infrastructure will be shared because the investment is huge, and these are typically very, very capex intensive projects. So there will be a lot of incentive for operators to share their network and resources, provided the regulation or the regulatory authority allows that. Utilization of spectrum assets and refarming. Again, this sort of teased on that earlier theme. Spectrum is supreme. There will be a lot of refarming that will be done, refarming from an older generation to a newer generation in order to roll out these newer services. And telco cloud and virtualization, again, we talked about, which is also, of course, in the vision, but we can already see that happening. And the 10th one also, from data analytics to cognitive networks, is the same thing as I was talking about, self-aware networks. So we've already seen the early sightings of these trends. which we believe, very strongly believe, that they are going to anything but accelerate. All right, so we've covered the two parts. First was Vision 2020. Second is about the trends that we see across the industry. Some trends might not be as marked in this part of the world, but maybe in other parts of the world, but we can see all of them. The third part is about where does the growth and opportunities come from, and what are the competencies do we need to thrive in this new environment, in this new age of data. At Nokia, we actually call ourselves an MBB company, a mobile broadband company, a mobile broadband specialist. And that is where, just a little bit of digression, those of you who are familiar with the legacy of Nokia know that Nokia used to make cell phones. There was a small, relatively small infrastructure division called Nokia Networks, which in 2007 merged with Siemens of Germany and formed Nokia Siemens Networks. And then after that, there was a little bit of a turbulent cycle, and the company went through a little tough phase. And then Siemens got off, and it became Nokia Solutions. And then we know that Nokia sold off the handset business to Microsoft. So all that remains of Nokia now is the networks business, and it is very, very focused on mobile broadband, MBB. As I call it, mobile bread and butter, because this is, the whole shtick I'm giving you right now is about how data is going to become so important for all of us. So we see a great opportunity over there, and I think this is where you as the next managers and leaders in this industry need to focus on. So growth, of course, we talked about these 6 2020 vision areas of requirements: latency, capacity, self-aware networks, personalized experience, telco cloud, and energy expenditure. This is, of course, enabled by the telecom network, and some of the terms that I threw earlier was HETNET, small cells, voice over LTE. LTE is primarily a data network, but you can send voice also over that. And we have LTE advanced and so on. Then you have contents and applications sitting on top of it. Right? We are very familiar with this. Of course, devices. Can't live without our devices. Then you have network management, the whole software and the associated ecosystem that ensures that your network is running, operating. You need services to deliver all of this, and that's a business that I handle, whether it's network optimization or implementation or planning or technical support, whatever it is. And of course, very, very important thing is that all of this needs to be encapsulated in an end-to-end network security. Because the more data we have on the cloud, the more likelihood that it becomes subject to some intrusions. And therefore, end-to-end security is going to be a very, very key area. Then there is the whole world of passive infrastructure, the cell site area, the power equipment, the antennas and towers. Then there are OTT content providers. Again, we use them quite often, services like Viber and all, which are a major disruptive force as well in the industry. And there are some of these new domains coming up which are still in the early stages, like big data, but these are the things you have to keep an eye for. And some of the new business models like machine-to-machine and Internet of Things that Professor Patil very eloquently introduced in the morning, and I'm sure we have a very, very enlightening discussion. I'm looking forward to it myself to learn about all of these things. So my message over here is, if you're part of the bandwagon, you're already too late. So You have to start thinking one step ahead. And that is why these things assume so much of importance. Yes, some of these things might turn up in 5 years' time. But the preparation has already begun, has already started, and companies are already looking at these things. There are business models being discussed. There are ideas being discussed how to monetize these things. And this is where institutions like yourself can play a very, very, very big role. So what competencies, and apologize for a lot of verbiage on the slide, but I'll summarize very briefly. What are the areas you should develop, look at? Of course, I think technological proficiency, this being a telecom management program, is table stakes. It's a given. I think it'll be expected that since you're not a general MBA program, you would have a good grasp. And events like these really, really go a long way in strengthening this foundation. Something very important, and of course, which is being taught. I know I've been to B school myself, although it was not a telecom-centric program, but business and analytical skills. What companies are looking for is people who can connect the dots. Who can connect the dots? It is a very complex world out there. There is a huge deal of uncertainty, but uncertainty is something in which professionals, people like us, should thrive, right? And it's all about attitude. How do we take it? Does anyone know Captain Jack Sparrow? Do you remember his dialogue? The problem is not the problem. The problem is our attitude about the problem. So I think if you keep that in mind, when you look at opportunities to grow, don't look at problems like problems, And when I hire, when I do interviews, the only thing I shouldn't say the only thing, but I would say that one of the biggest thing I look for is attitude. Everything else can be trained. Most things, rather, I would say, can be trained. But attitude is extremely important. Because I don't mean to demean any of the other skills over here. But project and program management skills. Again, of course, although you are not project managers in the real technical definition of the word, but when you get into a corporate life, very likely you will get opportunities to run some projects. It could be internal projects, could be customer-facing projects, anything. And that is where your drive, your initiative will be tested. For example, organizing an event like this, at this scale, with this level of professionalism, is a project, is a huge project in itself. And again, I salute all the organizing members. They have done such a great job on this. So these are the skills that you're learning right now over here. They will come in extremely handy when you are donning that corporate suit and trying to find solutions to answers that need to be found. Communication skills, I don't know if I need to emphasize that enough, but again, I think in this day and age, we are a telecommunications industry. We should be able to communicate of all. And strong interpersonal skills, when I say that, I mean invest in networking. Not just in networking, there is a very interesting term. There's actually also a book I read a few years ago. It's called net weaving. So not just networking, but net weaving. The industry is, as I was telling Weber in the morning, the industry is very small. Although the kind of scale we cover is pretty big, the platform is very big, but the industry still is very small, and you get to meet the same set of people, and there are so many connections that you find. So invest in that. I read a very interesting book, and I'm just sharing now some more of my personal experiences over here. It's called Never Eat Alone. I forgot the author's name. If someone knows, maybe can enlighten, but again, like everything else, you can Google it up. Never eat alone. And I really found that so useful. The author says that use every opportunity, and it's not about being selfish, guys. It's about creating value, and that's how net weaving is different from networking. You are actually creating value for others, because when you create value for others, you can extract value for yourself. You get value for yourself. So again, and there are some specific skills on the side. It's more about, as I was saying, how do you connect the dots? Business analysis. Think about value-based argumentation. These are again very, very, very strong things that will put you in a strong footing. Think about, as business leaders, think about how to monetize stuff, how to innovate. Let me see if there's anything that strikes. How to turn customer insights into opportunities. Again, that is also a very, very big thing right now going. Because as I said, revenue is flattening. We have to extract. There are a lot of avenues out there. So looking at customer data, for example, and seeing how to provide this target, how to extract this targeted revenue. So I don't know how I did on time, but probably I went way over. Did I? But here's a summary. It is an ever-evolving industry. And if we think that it is getting a little too complex, wait till we step into the future, because the pace of innovation is going to accelerate much, much faster. And we've seen that. Now we have almost a 20-year history of this industry. We know that it doesn't rest on its laurels. It doesn't respect status quo. This is an industry that hates, abhors, detests status quo. So it's extremely important for us to keep on learning, unlearning, and relearning. So at least I personally keep this motto very close to my heart. I want to continuously learn. I want to continuously unlearn some of the things that are no longer applicable. I want to relearn new things. So for example, renewal. Renewal is a very strong value, corporate value of Nokia. And I personally very strongly believe in that. And of course, being an educational institution of such esteem, I think this is something that is ingrained in your DNA, this culture of renewal. So I hope that continues throughout. It doesn't stop. So they will continue to evolve and transform. There are so many new things that will come up. We've talked about cloud and new business models. There'll be a whole new host of avenues that will open up on the investment side, on regulation, on partner models, and so on. And as I said, summarizing again, building competencies right at this point is extremely important for you. And here is my parting thought. Truly, sky is the limit. And since we're talking, basically, I'm talking mainly wireless. The sky is truly the limit for wireless. So with that, I think I want to again thank you very much for being so hospitable, so gracious. It has been a wonderful experience. My last shout out is to all the Nokia alumni in the audience over here. I know there are quite a few. So thank you very much. I hand it back to you. If there are, I don't know if we have time for any questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your experiences and insights. I now invite my colleagues to felicitate Sir with a memento as a token of our gratitude.